JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is one of the most distinctive works of fiction in manga and anime. So even when the execution isn't at its peak for whatever reason, being, keeping up with the weekly format or allotted anime time, the foundation of its ideas still remains solid. So with that in mind, I'm going to go through the aspects of JoJo that I believe could have been tweaked. The baseline concept is simple, making it thicker, add more story, create additional moments that hit harder emotionally, and enhance character development. Now let's look at what that would be like, starting with Phantom Blood. Now we need more of Dio's disdain for Jonathan, while Jonathan, simply grows as a person. Over the year, Jonathan got taller, stronger, and faster than Dio, but we should see how that's happening. Not in every detail, but key moments in their developmental years. More importantly, we need moments that show Dio treading that line between plotting on Jonathan's destruction and questioning if he really needs to go through with it. Because imagine scenes like, okay, Jonathan's asking Dio for help with his homework, and Dio choose not to. Like, he can just choose not to do that at all, or he can be like reluctantly assisting. Jonathan says, "Thank you, Dio, thank you, and you're so really smart, oh my gosh." While Dio is like, of course I'm smart, like duh. He'd be internally conflicted though, because when was the last time that Dio got a compliment that wasn't based on being better than Jonathan in some regard? And even in this case, it's going to be based on that, but it's going to be coming from Jonathan. Or a scene entirely different. Dio finding Jonathan eating dessert downstairs. It's late at night. Maybe it was his birthday cake. And you know that Dio could not care less about the reasons that Jonathan is here, but maybe they connect on something. Just Jonathan asking Dio about having a mother. It'll piss Dio off initially, but seeing Jonathan down about something that Dio got to have, they could really connect on this. But, something does have to break the moment because, all fictional stuff like that, something has to break the moment. Something simple too, right? Like Dio's going to be knocking over a cup of water and Jonathan catches it with faster reflexes than Dio, and in that moment, Dio's insecurity is going to be coming like rushing back. He remembers that Jonathan is continuously improving physically, and it just shatters that brief connection that they just shared. And Dio's going to storm out. Jonathan's going to call after him. He's going to be confused because nothing actually bad happened. Nothing spilled, everything's good. What the heck just happened? Why'd you leave? But to Dio, everything happened. He showed vulnerability to someone that he considers an enemy. His eyes lock back onto his objective, and the mask becomes even more significant later. These additions would show the complexity of their relationship, and we really start to understand that, man, that thing about brothers that really meant brothers. We create moments where redemption had actually seemed possible for Dio, which makes his ultimate choice even more tragic than that. It shows how Dio's pride and insecurity just drive his actions, and have Jonathan's continued kindness towards Dio more understandable, and we feel more gravity because you're just like, oh man, he's really trying to bridge that gap, but it's just not working. Jonathan is trying to find something in Dio that Dio can't even find in himself. That's just the first thing too. The next thing is exploring Dio's cowardice. So I think that we need to see more of Dio's character flaws, particularly his cowardice when facing genuine human connection, right? In the context of love and relationships, Dio hates Jonathan for being able to have someone genuinely interested in him like that. Erina loves Jonathan for who he is, and this concept is foreign to Dio. We should see how this plays out more directly because we see Dio, he had tried to kidnap Poco's sister. I don't even think she really got a name, but Poco's sister into becoming one under his side, someone that will have eternal life and youth. But he didn't hypnotize her. He has those powers, he has the ability to do that, but he didn't do that. He chose not to hypnotize her. He wanted her to make that decision to choose Dio, but she was brave enough to say no to him. You're just a sick guy. You're a monster cosplaying as a human. That was like her words. And the implication just sickens him because, probably in his eyes, his mother wasn't able to just leave Dario, as bad as it was there. So when someone says no to him while he's stronger than a large majority of the world alone, stronger than his dad ever was, he doesn't know how to feel. He's just like, oh, wow, okay, that hit. I'm pissed off about this. Now, I can make that statement, but that theory, because that's what it is. Like, I can make evidence on all of that, somewhat of it, and you can even have more evidence, but you have to sort of be more blatant in evidence for the regular viewer. Like, what exactly do we want people to get the idea of Dio? Authors that want to believe that their audiences are a lot smarter than they are, that's fine. That's great. Shout out to Tatsuki Fujimoto. But if you want to make that point, you're probably going to hit on that point multiple times, or just really, really effectively if you're only going to do it the one or two times. Araki says a lot about Dio and wanting to have done something more for his character related to the depth of it in his history, but he couldn't or didn't. Regardless, this is something that can be changed because, look, parts 1 and 2, they look great. Especially, like, it's just like, it's been 2012. There's a bunch of great looking anime in 2012 and even like 2000. There's a bunch of great looking anime in general, but, eventually there's going to be room for like another attempt. There's already room for another attempt, but just it's about like where that play into the landscape. Well, anyways, on to the next thing. Zeppeli's journey to find the stone mask. Now, we could add a lot more with Will Antonio Zeppeli's backstory and journey, but not as like continuous flashbacks, because I just don't I've never really been that type of person, but more so as like present time cutaways that happen whenever the stone mask is, I guess, mentioned or shown. When would these scenes happen? Anytime the stone mask is brought up, we cut to where Zeppeli is in the world and what he's doing. This wouldn't just be flashbacks, but showing his current journey and finding the mask. This approach would create around probably 2 more episodes by just placing these moments throughout the story, but it would be worth it for the added depth. Now, from what's established in his lore, we have a lot that we can show. When Tan Petty foresees Zeppeli's death in a flashback, just by having it earlier while we're establishing his character, we're going to be more on edge for when it does eventually happen, or the battle that's leading up to it, because it's him against Tarkus. Then we have Zeppeli remembering that he had, left his wife and son Mario behind, because this would connect over to not only the back-to-back case of that happening with Mario doing the same thing in Battle Tendency, but, Jonathan choosing the life of his family over his own, Joseph, Jotaro. You get the idea. Now, we think about this a lot more, this type of sacrifice. Now, one of the scenes that I thought about was that when Dio had used the stone mask on a random guy, happening at the same time as Zeppeli explaining the stone mask to someone, and before the stone mask drops, Zeppeli says something like, "Eternal life, unrelenting power, the stone mask must be destroyed." Boom, he's sent flying. Like, oh my gosh, what the heck? What is this? Kono power. Like, that's I love when they say that. That's all. I wanted to add that too. These scenes, they wouldn't just be information dumps, but instead, character development, showing Zeppeli's growth from a traumatized survivor to a mentor with purpose. When he later sacrifices himself for Jonathan, that moment hits harder because we've essentially seen his entire journey leading up to this point now. I think that this was the reason why I wanted to make the video, honestly, but just this section of the video, that we're still not done. An episode or scenes that would be dedicated to the Hamon warrior clan would be great for the world building. I think that this was establish the battle between the Hamon users and the stone mask evil that has been going on for generations now. We witnessed the first Hamon clan forming specifically to combat the mask evil. That'd be cool. Through generations, they pass down techniques. Each master has their own discoveries. Some die fighting vampires, others die training successors. It's a cycle that just continues again and again for centuries, and it's a cycle of sacrifice. But just one day, either they're found or the group finds them, this group either or, but we get our first glimpse of the Pillarmen, not fully revealed, but just enough to establish that they exist, show how they cut down the Hamon clan, show how much knowledge that they lost. But then we can also see how they built back up despite the damage. That'd be really, really cool. We're getting more stuff like, oh, hey, look, battle tendency. Oh, shoot, that's about to drop. And I'm honestly surprised that we didn't get that in the 2012 one, because well, they're just trying to go for a straightforward adaptation, to be fair. But, in part 5 is where you started getting like, oh, maybe we can add some more just because, and I like that. I like the idea of like, hey, let's just add some more just because. But with this edition, we would get to foreshadow the Pillarmen, foreshadow the Redstone of Asia, feel how long we've been fighting against this stone mask, feel how hopeless it looks to be fighting this continuously and having this fight with these undead beings, but the power in combating it, the power in sacrifice, the power in resilience, how Hamon is more than just a power system, but just a way of life, essentially. Like this is sacrifice. Hamon represents a lot more than just solar energy at this point, and it'd be great. The other two things that I'd like to add, George Joestar's character. I'm not going to call it character development because I'm not sure how much more I need him to change. Just by exploring George's relationship with both Jonathan and Dio more deeply would add another layer to the story. We could see his grief over his wife, obviously, because it's his wife, and how it affects his parenting, his genuine desire to help Dio, but also potentially having some suspicions here and there. The moments where he thinks that Jonathan and Dio had bridged the gap, they finally get it all that, because it would be better for him, and maybe it could be better for the viewer, make them care more in that moment than when he's gone. Because so far, George Joestar, in terms of the JoJo community, I'll tell you this right now, that he's in the same ballpark as the dad from Chicken Little, and that's not a good thing if you haven't seen Chicken Little. I'll just tell you that right now. And then the second thing being, we could also see Dio's time learning his abilities with stuff like, his experiments, his first attempts at creating zombies, him discovering the extent of his regenerative abilities and how much he can do, the steps before he fully learns how to freeze people, with the first time we actually see him doing it be against Zeppelin and Jonathan. But we should see the steps towards it. We didn't see anything towards that, but if the whole thing was that like, oh yeah, no, he just learned how to do it in real time because Dio's adaptation is so good, then I think that means we just have to show more of Dio's adaptive nature and showcasing his abilities and how much he's learned. Like, because even if we're not going to do it there, we have to show something for it to hit better on and make more sense in the moment. And just all around growing ambition as he understands what he's capable of. We could see Dio in part 3, that feeling of the highest point in his life. I think that we could do something similar to that, so then when it happens in part 3, they're gonna be like, oh, it's just like that time he did that, like just to have that moment where it's just like, oh, he's going crazy and he feels high and all that. But just do something once and show it again and people remember it. And lastly, the absolute last thing, I think we need to see Dio's Reign of Terror. The most effective example we got was on the ship, where he had turned regular people into zombies on our last part of the journey. Even though it's not him doing it, but it did happen regardless. But we need to see how Dio does his damage. The reason being, I don't think it's enough from what we've seen. We've seen two things, I'd say, where we know it gets bad because of how Dio had turned a mom into a vampire and she ate her kid. We know that it's gotten bad, and we know that there's a lot of bad because of Dio asking, how much bread do you think you've eaten in a lifetime? Like I don't care how much people I've been drinking. Like it's nothing to me. But I think that's the thing. My intention is hitting on that point. So if you see monsters, zombies, breaking into homes, Dio freezing people that are fleeing, his Space Ripper stingy eyes hitting someone at long range, or just his raw strength throwing something that's not normally lethally like by itself, but it's now lethal with how hard he's thrown it, you know, just like Uvo with that rock. You know, and spinning on Uvo, you know, like seeing Uvo again in Hunter x Hunter run through gangs on top of gangs, you get the extent of like the severity of the situation, his power, his strength. Like, oh my gosh, this guy is really running through everybody. And in Dragon Ball Z, rather than just blowing up planets, seeing Frieza and Vegeta do stuff like picking off Namekians, because they both did that, you know, you understood the gravity of the situation. It's like, oh my god, these guys are for real sick like that. I think that's the case. You have to hit hard on points like that for people to truly get it, because a lot of the time it's just not enough for viewers, at least not in like this current age. Dio's damage in Cairo had looked scarier than most of the stuff he had been hinted of doing in Phantom Blood. I believe that seeing is believing for a lot of people, and while subtext is cool and all, animation is cooler. There's no other way to spin it, to be honest with you. Now, the main point of Phantom Blood is the relationship between two brothers of circumstance, and these additions would, I think, amplify the entire world itself and that dynamic by making the part thicker with context and meaningful moments. We just have these emotional beats, and they'll hit harder because it would make the story feel more complete. Like, oh, hey, maybe this thing is deeper than Jonathan and Dio, but once you get back into the Jonathan and Dio storyline, you're like, oh man, maybe it's just like representative of like a greater issue. Like maybe Jonathan and Dio is actually just the face of the conflict that's been happening in the world, like this malice, this strive to be above humanity and humanity being itself. It would mean a lot. I'm trying to hit hard on that note. With Phantom Blood, I really don't think that there's anything I need to get rid of. I really don't think so. I think what JoJo usually needs when it comes down to everything is that it needed more time and room to just have like a different context and just fullerness of certain areas of the story where normally people be like, oh, I don't really think that would matter, but it does matter, and the implications say that it matters. It's just that execution wise, it didn't matter to you because it didn't hit that hard on those points. And with Phantom Blood, I'm hitting hard on my belief that all it needed as a part was more. And I think that's it.